Imagine you are moving halfway across the world, right? Like you're taking over as the CEO of a global region.
Oh, wow. Okay, big promotion.
Yeah, huge. So you step off the ship, luggage in hand, and you are ready to take on this massive, prestigious role. And then you realize something.
Let me guess. They lost your luggage.
Worse, HR completely forgot to book your housing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you are literally just standing on the docks, like with nowhere to go.
That sounds like a modern corporate nightmare. Yeah.
Exactly, but it is actually what happened to the highest-ranking bishop in Calcutta way back in 1823.
It really is like the ultimate administrative blunder.
Huh.
And welcome to our deep dive. Today we are looking at a historical document compiled by C.R. Wilson. It's called Note on the Episcopal Residence in Calcutta, 1824 to 1849.
Right, and I know that title sounds like a super dry, dusty ledger of 19th century addresses.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
What it actually holds is this, like, highly relatable, high-stakes corporate thriller.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking crumbling ceilings, paranoid executives, stealth acquisitions, and landlords who are just petty on a level that is, frankly, awe-inspiring.
I love when these academic documents hide all this wild human drama. But before we get into the bishop just standing confused on the docks, we need to set the scene for you.
Yeah, context is everything here.
So we are in Calcutta in 1823. What is the East India Company at this specific moment in history?
Right, so it is essential to understand that the East India Company was not a government. I mean, they acted like one, but they weren't.
They were a business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were a sprawling, publicly traded megacorporation, and by 1823, they practically ruled the Indian subcontinent.
Which is just wild to think about, a corporation ruling a subcontinent.
It's crazy. They possess massive standing armies, they literally mint their own currency, and they completely control these global trade routes. But because they are a corporation, and they're managed by this court of directors sitting thousands of miles away in London, they operate with this level of maddening bureaucratic inefficiency.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it makes modern tech giants look incredibly streamlined by comparison.
Okay, let's unpack this, because how does a mega corporation that mints its own currency just, forget to house its top executive?
Yeah.
We are talking about Bishop Heber, right? He arrives in October of 1823. What actually went wrong here?
Total institutional friction. Basically, the court of directors in London had resolved to provide the bishop with a proper residence.
Like a palace, right?
Essentially a palace, yeah. But the physical orders to actually acquire or build that palace, they never sent them out.
Wait, they just forgot to mail the letter.
Pretty much.
Oh,
The resolution was like postponed in some meeting, pushed down the agenda, and then they just forgot about it.
that is so embarrassing.
Right. So when Heber arrives in Calcutta, which is this city of immense wealth and power, the company effectively looks at him and says, oh, right, the house. Well, we don't have one.
That is completely baffling. I mean, he took a 6-month sea voyage to get there, and nobody bothered to check the paperwork.
Yeah.
So how did he survive this? Like, where does a person of that status even go?
Well, it kicks off this highly chaotic period of hopping around. I have his timeline right here in the source text, actually.
Okay, lay it on me.
First, they cram him into Government House inside Fort William.
Wait, Fort William, isn't that a military fort?
Exactly. It's a bustling, incredibly noisy military and administrative fortress.
So not exactly the vibe for quiet spiritual leadership.
Definitely not. So by early 1824, he moves his whole family out to a house in a suburb called Titigur.
Okay, an upgrade.
Not really. The text notes he quickly finds the area, quote, unhealthy. He complains bitterly about the oppressive heat and the dust. He basically says, I have to get out of here.
So he's just bouncing from temporary housing to temporary housing at this point.
Correct. So by March, he signs a lease for a place at number 3 Harrington Street.
Okay, finally settling down.
You'd think so, but that falls apart almost instantly, too. The rent is 500 rupees a month, which, keep in mind, the government is paying, but Heber claims the house is completely unworkable.
Why? What's wrong with it?
He says it's too small for his family, there's no room for his extensive library, and it's too far from the cathedral.
Okay, pause for a second on those numbers. You said the rent was 500 rupees a month.
Right.
When I hear rupees, my modern brain just assumes that's like pocket change. What is the actual purchasing power we're talking about here in 1824?
Oh, that is a great question. In the 1820s, a rupee was this substantial silver coin. To put it in perspective for you, a typical local servant or laborer back then might earn like 3 or 4 rupees for an entire month of work.
Oh, wow. So 3 or 4 rupees for a whole month.
Exactly. So a rent of 500 rupees a month is astronomical. It is the modern equivalent of an executive housing budget of tens of thousands of dollars a month.
Okay, so the company is throwing serious cash at this problem,
Right.
and the bishop still hates the house.
Right, because you have to remember, a bishop in colonial Calcutta wasn't just a priest. He was an institution.
That makes sense.
He needed massive space to host dignitaries, to do his administrative work, to represent the majesty of the Church of England.
Right. Number 3 Harrington Street just wasn't cutting it.
Not at all. So just a month later, in April, he essentially forces an upgrade. He signs a new lease for number 5 Middleton Place, which,
Yep.
fun fact, later became Loretto House.
Oh, nice.
And the rent on this new place jumped to 600 rupees a month.
Okay, I am so curious what a 600 rupee a month mega mansion actually looked like back then.
Well, I actually have a quote right here from a letter Heber wrote to a Miss Dodd back in England.
Let's hear it.
He says the house exceeds all their ideas of comfort. He lists the dimensions, too. He says there's a dining room that is 67 feet long,
Good grief.
a drawing room on the first floor that is also 67 feet long, and a study supported by stone arcades that is 45 feet square.
What?
Yeah, he literally writes that he feels, quote, almost lost inside it.
67 feet. That is not a dining room. That is a bowling alley.
Literally.
That is a staggering amount of space for one family. But wait, let me think about this. If the company is paying 600 silver rupees a month for a rental, why wouldn't a corporation that controls the trade of an entire subcontinent just build him a custom palace?
Right.
Surely they had the land and the builders.
Oh, they absolutely did. And the local government in Calcutta actually really wanted to build it. They ran the numbers and estimated that a brand new purpose-built palace would cost them about 60,000 rupees.
Okay.
But the court of directors in London explicitly blocked it. They sent a dispatch over mandating that the local government had to rent a property instead.
But that is just terrible math. Let me do the quick calculation. If you are paying 7,200 rupees a year in rent, it takes, what, less than 9 years to eclipse the cost of just building the 60,000 rupee house from scratch?
Yep.
Why would the East India Company take such a wildly bad long-term deal?
Because, honestly, it is the classic short-term corporate mindset. We see this exact same thing all the time today with, like, CapEx versus OpEx.
Oh, capital expenditure versus operating expenditure?
Exactly. Building a 60,000 rupee palace is a massive CapEx hit. It goes directly on this year's ledger, and the shareholders back in London will look at that and see a giant dip in their quarterly profits.
Right, I see.
But renting at 600 rupees a month, that's just OpEx. It
Yeah.
blends right into the monthly administrative costs. The directors in London didn't care about the 9-year math.
Right, they cared about the next quarter.
Exactly. They just cared about keeping huge liabilities off the current ledger so their dividends looked good that specific year.
That is amazing. So they forced their local branch to make a terrible financial decision just to appease the shareholders.
Pretty much.
You know, it really is comforting to know that completely irrational corporate dysfunction is like a centuries-old tradition.
It never changes.
But locking themselves into this permanent rental strategy, that sets the stage for a massive disaster later on, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Fast forward a few years to 1826, and the government signs a new 11-year lease for a different property at number 5 Russell Street.
Okay, Russell Street.
And this introduces us to the landlord, a man named Mr. James Paddle,
Ah, Mr. Paddle, the Hall of Fame bad landlord.
to put it mildly. Yeah. So almost immediately after this 11-year lease is signed, the bishopric happens to be briefly vacant. The previous bishop died, so a man named Archdeacon Corey moves in to occupy the Russell Street house in the interim.
Let's establish the hierarchy here real quick for everyone. What exactly is an archdeacon?
Think of the bishop as the CEO, right?
Okay.
And the archdeacon is essentially the vice president of operations. He is very high up, managing all the day-to-day affairs of the church. So Corey moves into Russell Street, and almost immediately, he sounds the alarm. He formally writes to the East India Company and flat out declares the building is completely unsafe. He says the walls are buckling.
Now, reading this, I have to play devil's advocate and ask, was Corey just being a paranoid tenant who didn't like some creaky floorboards? Or was he actually in real danger?
Oh, he was in very real mortal danger. The building was failing, but the government's response to him is like a masterclass in bureaucratic gaslighting.
Oh, boy.
When the VP of the church says, hey, this building is going to collapse on me, the East India Company doesn't just trust him or move him to a hotel. because they are locked into this ironclad 11-year lease. They do what every bureaucracy does. They form a committee.
Of course they do. When in doubt, form a committee to investigate the extremely obvious problem.
Exactly. In November of 1826, they send out Colonel Muth, Captain Garston, and Lieutenant Forbes to inspect the property.
Sounds official.
Yeah, these are military engineers. And what do they report back?
Yeah.
They declare the house is, quote, quite safe.
You're kidding.
No, I'm looking at their report right here in the source text. They specifically note that the walls are adequate to support the superincumbent weight of the third story.
So they just brushed him off.
Completely. They stripped back a few parts of the plaster, looked at the bricks, and basically told the archdeacon he was imagining things.
Wow. So the engineers tell him it's fine. Does Corey try to get out of the lease anyway?
He tries, but then the legal department steps in.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, the Advocate General, which is essentially the chief legal officer for the whole colony, he reviews the contract. And he rules that according to the lease they signed with Mr. Paddle, the government has absolutely no power to cancel or throw up the lease just because they feel unsafe.
Wait, so Corey is completely trapped, the engineers are gaslighting him, telling him he is crazy, and the corporate lawyers tell him that even if he isn't crazy, he legally can't leave.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And so the highest religious officials in the city are forced to live in this house for years.
Just waiting for the roof to cave in.
Yeah. And it isn't until 1831, 5 full years later, during the tenure of a new bishop named Bishop Turner, that they finally get some vindication.
What happens in 1831?
Bishop Turner basically says, I refuse to accept the old committee's report. He brings in an independent builder, a guy named Mr. Parker, to carefully examine the palace.
And what does Mr. Parker find?
Parker pronounces that the north and south walls of the principal hall are absolutely, undeniably unsafe. They were failing.
5 years. They had been sleeping in a potential death trap for half a decade just because a committee didn't want to admit there was a structural flaw they couldn't legally escape.
It's terrifying. And it required immediate, massive interventions. The palace was completely unfit for occupation while they tore out walls and reinforced the whole structure.
And this is where our landlord, Mr. James Paddle, really shows his true colors, right? I mean, the walls of his property are literally failing, causing massive disruptions to the government. How does he handle the repair bill?
Oh, he points to the lease. The contract stipulated certain timelines for maintenance, right? Paddle looks at the crumbling walls and says, well, according to the terms we signed, complete repairs are not due until 1829.
No way.
Yes. So he flat out refuses to pay for more than half the cost of fixing his own failing building.
That is just breathtaking audacity. He basically says, sorry, the roof is caving in on you, Your Grace, but if you check paragraph 4, you'll see I don't really have to care for another 3 years.
It gets worse.
How does it get worse?
Well, the house was vacant during some of these repairs. Certain fixtures went missing. Paddle actually writes a formal letter to the government with an itemized list of what was lost. And it was principally like a few iron bars and window bolts.
He didn't.
He did. He demands the East India Company pay him for the missing bolts. His walls almost crushed the Bishop of Calcutta, and he's billing them for loose hardware.
What's fascinating here is the power dynamic. Think about it. You have the holiest men in the city representing the majesty of the Church of England, and they are backed by the staggering wealth and military might of the East India Company.
Right.
And yet they are entirely at the mercy of one stubborn guy with a piece of paper. It really shows how deeply entrenched property rights and contract law were in colonial society.
Oh, absolutely.
The contract superseded common sense, it superseded safety, and it even superseded corporate might.
It really did. I mean, they were just powerless against the lease, and they suffered through this dynamic for over a decade. The government actually ended up buying that cursed Russell Street house outright in 1838.
Wait, they bought it?
Yeah, for 75,000 rupees, just to finally be free of Mr. Paddle's lease game.
Wow.
But even then, the house was a total money pit. It needed constant repairs.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting for me, because in 1849, a new leader arrives who looks at this entire history of bureaucratic failure and decides, you know what? He is done playing the victim. He's going to take matters into his own hands.
Yes. Enter Bishop Wilson.
Bishop Wilson wants out of the Russell Street house. He sets his sights on a new, much better property. It's the former house of a Mr. Wilberforce Bird, located on Charingi Road.
Right.
But Wilson knows the history of how the East India Company operates. He knows that if he asks for a committee, it'll take 5 years and he'll end up with a terrible deal. So how does he actually approach this?
Wilson is brilliant. He realizes that if the public or the seller gets wind that the Lord Bishop of Calcutta, backed by government coffers, is looking to buy their specific house, the price will instantly skyrocket.
Sure, it's basic supply and demand, heavily skewed by the deep pockets of the buyer.
Exactly. So Wilson decides to execute this real estate purchase with what he literally calls the utmost secrecy and dispatch.
It is a total stealth mission. I'm looking at Wilson's letters here from the source, and he explicitly states that secrecy is of the greatest importance, quote, lest rumors should get abroad and the price be heightened.
Yeah.
He completely bypasses the standard corporate channels, so who does he actually use to broker the deal?
He enlists military men to act as his covert agents.
That's amazing.
He brings in Colonel Green of the Mint and Captain Scott of the Military Board. He authorizes them to negotiate directly on his behalf without notifying the broader government.
Wow.
And he begs for the Treasury funds to be ready at a moment's notice so they can close the deal. The absolute second an agreement is reached before anyone realizes who the true buyer is.
It is special ops real estate acquisition.
It totally is.
And it works, right? He secures the right of first refusal for 49,000 rupees. Ultimately, with the purchase and some immediate improvements he wants done, the total cost comes to about 79,000 rupees. But here is the major problem. The East India Company still owns the old, cursed Russell Street Palace. How does Wilson convince the board in London to approve the purchase of a second massive property?
Well, this is where Wilson really shows his true business acumen. He knows the government will balk at the financial risk of holding two properties at once. So Wilson personally guarantees the transaction.
Wait, what does that mean?
He proposes that the government buy the new Chowringhee Road house for 79,000 rupees and immediately sell the old Russell Street Palace, which at the time was valued around 60,000 rupees.
Okay.
And he puts in writing that if the proceeds from selling the old palace fall short of the cost of the new one, he will bear the financial loss himself out of his own pocket.
He is basically acting as his own escrow account. He's underwriting the risk to bypass the board of directors. That is a staggering amount of personal confidence.
It is huge, and it leaves a massive impression on the colonial administration. The source document includes this very telling quote from Lord Dalhousie, who was the Governor-General of India at the time.
What did he say?
Dalhousie stated that he considered Bishop Wilson, quote, one of the best men of business he had ever met.
That is incredible praise coming from the head of the most powerful corporation on earth.
Really is.
You know, it completely changes how you view these historical religious figures. You usually think of a 19th century bishop purely in theological terms, right? Like writing sermons, studying scripture, holding mass.
Exactly.
But to survive the bureaucracy of colonial Calcutta, Wilson had to negotiate, strategize, and outmaneuver the market just like a modern Wall Street shark.
He really did. He had to be as shrewd as the corporate merchants he was preaching to every Sunday.
So Wilson effectively forces the East India Company to mobilize roughly 79,000 rupees for a single property transaction. That is a massive injection of capital. When a single individual or an institution is throwing that kind of weight around, what is actually happening to the Calcutta housing market at large?
Well, to really understand that, we have to look at the appendices of C.R. Wilson's document. They contain the actual title deeds for these properties, tracing their ownership back through the decades. And they act as this incredible ledger for a booming, explosive colonial real estate market.
Let's trace one. What about the infamous number 5 Russell Street property? The House of Hazards with the petty landlord.
Yeah, let's look at that one. Originally, it wasn't a palace at all. It was just a modest garden house owned by a man named Henry Vansittart.
Okay.
But look at the trajectory of its value as the East India Company expanded its grip on global trade.
Let me guess, the inflation was pretty steep.
Beyond steep. In November of 1769, that property was purchased for 41,000 rupees.
All right, 41,000.
Just 13 years later, in 1782, it is flipped for 80,000 rupees.
Whoa, it almost doubled.
It almost doubled in value in a little over a decade. And then when it is eventually sold to our favorite landlord, James Paddle's trustees in 1824, the purchase money is 1,000 rupees.
Hold on, from 41,000 to 1,000 rupees?
Yep.
Based on what you said earlier about the purchasing power of a silver rupee, where a worker makes 3 rupees a month, that is an unbelievable amount of wealth accumulating in one specific neighborhood.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, these seemingly dry title deeds show us the real mechanics of an economic gold rush.
Right.
Calcutta in this era was transforming from a regional trading post into the undisputed capital of British India. The wealth from global shipping, textiles, spices, it was all pouring into the city.
So everyone wanted a piece of the land.
Exactly. The population of administrators and merchants was expanding rapidly, and property values were just absolutely skyrocketing.
It's gentrification on an imperial scale. The real estate market was moving so fast that a simple garden house became a six-figure asset that the government was, frankly, desperate to rent.
It's wild. And there is a final wonderful irony to the story of that specific Russell Street house.
Oh, do tell.
So after serving as a modest garden house, then becoming a 1,000 rupee asset, then serving as the cursed crumbling palace of the bishops.
Right, the money pit.
Right. It is eventually sold off by Bishop Wilson's executor many years later in 1863.
Who finally bought the thing?
His Highness Prince Ghulam Muhammad.
You are kidding.
I'm not. It completes this completely bizarre architectural journey. It goes from a colonial garden home to an institutional nightmare managed by petty landlords and stubborn committees, and finally it evolves into literal royal property.
That is an unbelievable arc for a single plot of land. And honestly, for this whole story, I mean, we started this deep dive talking about a mega corporation for getting to file HR housing orders, stranding a bishop on the docks.
Right.
We watched executives fight with gaslighting engineers over structural integrity and haggle with a landlord over the price of missing iron bolts.
Yep.
And we ended up with a bishop running a covert real estate operation, all against the backdrop of an explosive economic boom that turned garden houses into royal palaces.
It is just a perfect illustration of how history is rarely just about grand geopolitical policies or, sweeping theological debates. Often the reality of history is driven by the very human, very frustrating logistics of simply trying to put a safe roof over your head.
Totally. So, to you listening, the next time you find yourself entirely frustrated by a giant, slow-moving bureaucracy, or maybe you are dealing with a landlord who refuses to fix a crumbling wall because of some technicality buried in paragraph 4 of your lease.
Which happens all the time.
It really does. Just take a deep breath. Remember that you are participating in a grand tradition that goes back centuries. Even the most powerful executives in the 19th century, backed by global empires, couldn't escape the nightmare of a bad lease.
And it leaves us with an interesting question to ponder, I think. We've seen how much effort Bishop Heber and Bishop Wilson had to expend just to secure a building.
It was their whole lives for a while.
Exactly. So consider how much of an institution's energy, its time, and its capital, whether we are talking about a 19th century church in Calcutta or a modern-day tech startup in Silicon Valley, is consumed not by its actual stated mission, but simply by the friction of managing the physical spaces it occupies. Wow. Do our buildings serve our missions, or do our missions inevitably end up serving our buildings?
That is a brilliant thought to leave off on. We really hope this exploration into the bureaucratic battlegrounds of 19th century Calcutta sparked your curiosity today. Keep questioning the structures around you, both the physical ones and the bureaucratic ones. Until next time.